this is changing the story for high schoolers. So again, when I talked about this kind of transition from recruiting jobs to recruiting people, this is one piece of it. You could also talk about resident recruitment. You could talk about engaging populations with high barriers to employment. You could talk about housing, childcare, that Marnie does a lot of work of over here. But we're going to focus just on this one because it's the newest report that we released here at the Center for Rural Policy and Development, and it's one that I just got really interested in, and I just think it's cool. And so when, as we're talking about trying to increase the amount of people that come to our rural areas or stay in it, one of the pieces has to be, what are we telling our young people? Are we keeping them here? Should we keep them in our rural areas, right? These are kind of tough questions. And so we did an academic literature review to just try and figure out, like, okay, how are perceptions of communities developed by young people? And so really two types of influences. And yes, we probably didn't need academic literature to tell us that it's relationships and observations. But we did because we're nerds and we like doing that kind of stuff. So when we talk about influencers, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about three things. And the three things I always point out is college admissions. So it's really, you really have to recognize that for a lot of colleges, the college admissions folks that go out to your high schools, they are salespeople. They need to sell to the sophomore or the junior or the senior and their parents that them coming to their college is a good economic idea, right? And one of the reasons, a reason that have been used for years is that you have to leave your small town or your rural areas in order to succeed because that's where the best jobs are, even though that's not the case anymore. We'll talk about that. Immediate family, I don't think this gets talked about enough, is what are we telling our kids as parents and as uncles and aunts about the careers and opportunities available to them? And then formal advisors in the high schools. That's another big one. How are our formal advisors talking to our students in the high schools about the careers and opportunities? And the second thing is these influences or these observations, right? So there's career opportunities. So what are students seeing available in their community? Are we putting it in front of them? And then community opportunities. Are we actually getting our students involved in our communities to help make some of the decisions? How do they want their community to look in 10 years? What would they like it to be if they lived and bought a house here? We don't really ask those questions. So retention and engaging youth is going to take a full court press, I guess is how I'd say if I wanted to keep it like high school basketball terms. When we first started interviewing economic developers about retaining high school students, a lot of them were like, well, we had our regional job fair. And all the local employers were there. And I'm like, that's great. That's just a start. Because I guarantee you that student was really excited about those career opportunities for about 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, they were bombarded with all of the other kinds of influences that influence them on a daily basis, right? So regional job fairs, it's going to take apprenticeships and internships, career and technical instruction. Like all of this is going to be constant in front of them in order to change their perception about what their opportunities are. So we did some research around the journey to meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. And the three things, we took every student that graduated in Southwest Minnesota from 2008 to 2019, and we looked at kind of what their education, high school experience was from sophomore to senior year, and then looked at what did they do after they graduated high school. And the top three things that kind of really was an indicator that it was highly more likely that that student would work in the Southwest or have meaningful workforce participation, as we called it in this research, is they participated in career and technical education in high school. That was a big one. Not only did that mean that they're highly more likely to have employment in the region in Southwest Minnesota, but also that they are more likely to go to college in the region, which again, number two here, graduated from a local regional college made a huge difference in whether they were in the region working after they graduated. And then the third thing, graduated from a 2-year college and or attained associate degree. All three of these things were pretty significant indicators of a student working in the region in Southwest. And there's lots of these types of activities happening in greater Minnesota. Involvement from business community. So some of you might have the CEO program, creating entrepreneurial opportunities. ProStart and Brainerd, if you're interested, talk to them about how they implemented a culinary career pathway in the high schools there, which I think is pretty cool. Sorry, Julie, I don't know if I'd be here if I had that in my high school. I might have been a chef.
Oh, you're here now.
Yep. Increasing interest in CTE. And again, Bemidji Career Academy is one to throw that out. They've been doing a fabulous job up there. And the other one is Lyft. And I really like Lyft. This is in Southwest Minnesota. And what they did is, if you were to talk to a lot of rural high schools, a lot of them would say, we would love to offer more career and technical education in our courses, but we don't have the resources, we don't have the technical expertise, we're already stretched thin in trying to provide the state mandated services that we have to already provide. CTE is just always going to be on the back burner. And so Lyft got some money from the state legislature to help, and they just kind of sidle up next to these school districts and help them fill out the grants, get the requirements, pull in the two-year colleges, pull in other school districts that might be willing to collaborate, figure out transportation, and provide that technical expertise to get these things implemented. And they've implemented a lot of CTE programming in Southwest Minnesota, and it's really, really great to see. The last thing I'll say is this is kind of one of the big things that we've seen, and I'm just encouraging Minnesota to continue to think about these types of strategies. And this is one in South Dakota. It's called the Build Dakota Scholarship Fund. And this is a program where if a student comes to South Dakota, goes to a two-year college, and under certain income limits, it might be $100,000 or less, they then graduate from that two-year college, work in South Dakota for 3 years in an occupation that's considered in demand, which is pretty much all of them. They get their tuition and books paid for. And that's a pretty significant deal on a couple of levels. One, they don't have to be from South Dakota, so they're getting students from Southwest Minnesota in particular to come there and go to their two-year colleges and then work in South Dakota, which is pretty significant. And the second thing I'll say is that it's a state-funded and philanthropy-funded program to get set up, but they've been able to keep it rolling because they've had communities, EDAs, employers all chipping in as well, where you have some communities that say, hey, we are in dire need of electricians and plumbers. We have some of our own high school graduates that have been working with these employers. You know what? We will sponsor them to go get licensed and get their two-year degree or whatever is needed, because they said they would work here for 3 years and do that. So very, very cool, because it gets everybody kind of involved in it. I'm going to skip these and just say, I think Minnesota has a real opportunity when it comes to the Build Dakota, recruiting people here. We have a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of really interesting assets, I guess, in Minnesota that I think are important, and we just need to figure out a way how to utilize it, not only to retain our high school students, but to recruit people from other states as well. So,
I have one question for you. Minnesota passed the North Star Promise. The state of Minnesota did this last year. What are the differences between the North Star Promise and Build Dakota?
Yeah, this is another blog post I put out. So the North Star Promise, if some of you aren't aware of it, it was passed by the state legislature at the last legislative session. A bit of an answer to Build Dakota, which is essentially students that I think it's $80,000 or less, or somewhere around that income level, household income level, that goes to a University of Minnesota or Minnesota State College in Minnesota. They get their tuition and fees waived. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's 4-year or 2-year. The big differences are, one, North Star Promise doesn't have a work requirement in it, which I would argue probably that might be a necessary tweak. I think particularly for colleges on the border states, we may have some students that go to Moorhead, get the tuition paid, and easily go work in Fargo after they graduate from college. And I think that I think we need to think through, like, no, we're investing in you. We want you to stay here. Why don't you, demand that you have to work here for 3 years at least, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think that's beyond reasonable. The second thing is that it's only Minnesota residents, where South Dakota, you can be from any state. Sure. And go to a 2-year college there. And so they're not only are they trying to retain their own students, they're recruiting from border states as well. The last thing I would say is that the Build Dakota program is only for 2-year colleges. North Star Promise is both 4-year and 2-year. I don't know how big of a difference that will make. I've heard from 2-year colleges that are nervous about that students then might be incentivized to not even go to 2-year college, but just go to 4-year college and skip 2-year altogether. I don't know if that's true. I haven't seen significant evidence on that yet, but it is a worry in the field. So I'd say those are the two main differences between North Star Promise and Build Dakota.